Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our online congregation meeting. I'm going to ask Pastor Pledger to open us in a word of prayer.
I invite you to pray with me. Gracious and eternal God, we give you thanks once again for bringing your people together in a meeting, even as virtual as it may be. You are always with us each step of the way. We ask for your blessing upon our discussion today. We ask that you'd give to everyone wisdom and focus regarding the ministry to which you've called us. Allow us to make good and wise decisions that will bless the people of your church and bless ultimately your most holy name. Allow us by your grace to be a congregation that communicates with the community the great gospel message of Jesus Christ, him crucified and risen again, and that the decisions that we are making today will be decisions that bless the whole community. In Jesus, your precious and holy name. Amen.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Bethany Ministry has been challenged lately with the pandemic and fires. We haven't had to change the message, but we've had to change the way it's presented. Presented in outdoor worship sessions, presented online, change the way the school has to operate. But this Bible's message is still there. God's message is still there. And so that's where we have to focus and trying to adjust to it. So it does require us to take another look at our long-range plans. So to begin with, Bethany has been planning to expand the ministry at Ulatis Drive by building a new preschool and a sanctuary. We plan to fund it from savings and from the South Orchard property sale. But COVID-19 came along and definitely impacted enrollment. It's a lot less than the budget targets. School is at 124 versus the congregation approved budget of 152. Preschool's at 24 versus the 46 budgeted. And so that causes concern about building a new school during this pandemic. We don't know how long the pandemic's going to last. We don't know how it's going to affect how we have to operate. Another thing that's been affected by the pandemic is material costs. Construction costs of a preschool building and a sanctuary have all gone up. Our shortfall is about $700,000 from the cash we need to build. We have to rethink our finances. And so a long-term budget plan has been updated and new options for timing of construction need to be considered. Let's first talk about construction costs. The preschool is now at $3.1 million. The sanctuary estimated by our architect at $2.5 million, but we have $5 million available in cash. So that is a shortfall of about $700,000. The financing issue. U.S. bank bonds can't be increased. The principal that we have is $5.78 million, and the payments are $407,000 in fiscal year 2020, 2021. After that, they increase. The amortization schedule has an increasing principal payment. Interest goes down slightly, but the principal goes up by a lot more. So a new loan is required, a higher balance to pay for both the preschool and sanctuary. With lower enrollment, we don't really have the revenue needed for a new loan this high, or even the existing loan. One-time revenue this year help make a new revised budget work. And Curt will talk about that shortly. So we considered a number of options: stay on course and hope for the best, look for ways to lower costs, maybe with competitive bid or laborers for Christ, fundraising could increase our revenue. Building just one building now might be a way, preschool first or sanctuary first. And we can use, or another option is using the $5 million in cash to pay off U.S. Bank and apply for a gap loan, because we don't have quite enough to pay them off, of about $800,000, which would leave us some liquidity. It would keep costs low during this pandemic period, and we would wait to build until the ministry dictates that. Build a sanctuary only option. This option would forego construction of the preschool building. Sufficient funds to build from existing reserves. We would retain $2.5 million in reserves and still have $5.5 million in debt from U.S. Bank. But Sanctuary doesn't provide future revenue to build a future preschool. Unless it grows, we do have promise of that. Pastor Pledger's already had some new member classes, a new member class in progress, and hopefully more people will become interested with his leadership. Essentially, we would be locking in our current budget for a long term unless offerings went up. We would struggle to meet our loan requirements. We could build the preschool first as an option. Building a preschool now and use future revenue to build a sanctuary. Sufficient funds to build from existing reserves, and we would retain $2 million in reserves. A full preschool would generate $700,000 in annual net income and would allow us to refinance our existing loan. Annual revenue could be saved until we had the funds for a sanctuary or we refinance. The timing of the sanctuary would be dependent on how fast the preschool and school enrollment grows. In the interim, we could hold services for several years after the lease at South Orchard expires in interim locations. We could use the existing Lattice fellowship room or the new preschool building. Or another option is to install a permanent tent on the front line at Lattice until sanctuary could be built. Or we could rent space at the community center. There's a lot of options. We can also negotiate with Vacaville Unified School District to try and see if they'd let us use the sanctuary for our meeting times, worship and special services and funerals, weddings. We may be able to negotiate that. So what's our recommendation? Well, we need to pray for God's guidance and ministry direction. We need to use the orchard property for 1 year free lease and then negotiate with VSD to use orchard property for the future. We need to pay off the existing U.S. bank loan of $5.78 million. We can use $5 million in cash plus $800,000 gap loan. Luther Church Extension Fund has an interest rate of 3.75% and a payment for a 10-year amortization would be about $8,000 per month. So that would reduce the cost from $407,000 per year to $96,000 per year in fiscal year 2020-2021. That $800,000 loan is a backup plan until God leads Bethany to the right decisions. And we're very hopeful that the pandemic is going to let up and we'll be able to operate the school the way we have in the past. But until that happens, we have a backup plan. So council recommends that we put a construction on hold until the pandemic has passed, until ministry generates income for a new loan. And we also recommend to complete the preschool plan so that we'll be ready. There's a plan check, that the plans are at the city in plan check already. So we might as well finish that process. A new loan could be lower than the U.S. Bank, just enough to build a preschool once the pandemic is passed. About $4.5 to $5 million, depending on the costs. Costs could go up while we're waiting. Building the preschool first does provide future income for the sanctuary. So our request to the congregation, please review the presentation and financials. Curt's going to share those financials in a moment, a summary of them, and we'll be sending the documents to you via email. We ask that you prayerfully consider and vote whether to approve the council recommendations. Please reply with your questions and comments by September 27th to carol.wilson@gobethany.com. That's where your email will come from. You can also get the information in the church office. Her phone is 530-867-7078 if you prefer to talk to someone in person. You can vote online by return email, and we ask you to do that by September 30th to the same email, or you can drop your vote in the church office. If you have any questions council wants to hear or any comments, and we'll try and answer questions. We'll try and turn those around as fast as possible and try and be ready for you to vote by September 30th. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to turn the presentation over to Curt Johnston now. He wants to share with you projected income and expense budgets for this year and the following 5 years, so you can understand where we're hoping Bethany Ministries can go.
Thank you, Ron. Good job on that presentation. This has been a really difficult decision, and sometimes God backs you into a corner for a reason, and we believe that the reason was to allow Bethany a chance to sort of sit back and consider different alternatives. We've been dealing with this U.S. bank loan really since nearly the beginning. The school site was built in 2006. That's when we opened it, August 2006. The U.S. bank financing was put together shortly after that, the year after that. And it's had some very stringent requirements with it. And I think I've talked about this in prior meetings, that it's been good and bad at the same time. The positive is that each and every quarter since 2007, when, almost 13 years, each and every quarter, we have had to show a profit here at Bethany. It's put a lot of strain on the organization because we could never have a bad day. Each and every year, literally every 3 months, we had to show a profit. And as a result of that, though, it really has blessed this congregation. They've been difficult times, but God has blessed the congregation in giving us about $2.5 million in cash. That is money that's been saved over time, and it is demonstrated. It's demonstrated to the church council that the ministry of a preschool and school is valuable to the congregation and allowing us to expand our ministry in a major way. And looking back at the last 13 years really led us to this decision. I know I felt the pressure for these 13 years about the loan that large. But over time, a couple things have really come to light. One, when we originally approved the construction on Ulatis Drive, tuition was about $3,000. It's now more than double that, and I'll show you the numbers. So the debt is no longer crushing in terms of tuition, and that's a real number. Boy, we sure wish we could build buildings at the less than $200 a square foot that we built back then, because the costs now are about over $300 a square foot for just a preschool. But we know that the value that we have on that site is tremendous, and because of that income that we've generated over time, and the fact that selling this property, and I really believe that it was the hand of God that allowed us to get $3.6 million. We sold the 2 houses, we're selling this site, and unfortunately the preschool burned down, but it ended up generating another $800,000, $700 net after we tore the old building down. So all of those things have led us to this position. So what we did is, when we looked at the cash that we had, we said, with this pandemic, we have an opportunity to nearly pay off that U.S. bank loan. So we're about $800,000 short. It's less than that, but we want to keep some money in the bank for a rainy day. So the basis of this plan is that we basically put the building projects on hold till the pandemic ends. We're hoping that we could, maybe a year from now, be under construction. But that will be God's timing. But the plan that we put together allows that to happen. The other thing that we struggled with is that we want a sanctuary, but the sanctuary doesn't provide the ongoing revenue. And if we build the sanctuary first, does that lock us into this budget where we're always struggling to meet our loan covenants? So I'm going to go through what we call a growth plan, and the growth plan starts with, and it's like 16 pages long, so you're going to get the PDF file and you'll be able to see it. The first page of that growth plan is the summary, and that summary sheet includes growth plan information as well as information from the annual budget. So the growth plan starts with tuition and our looking at tuition over the next 5 years. It goes into estimates of what student enrollment will be, and the enrollment numbers were originally provided by Dr. Smith, and Cindy Miller and pastor had input, all church council had input, but really it was driven by the school, by Dr. Smith. And then we looked at what revenue that generates. We looked at the staff costs that it takes to run the congregation and the school and the preschool. And all of that information got put into this growth plan. So if you look at that summary sheet, and what I'm going to do is quickly go over the first page, which is the summary sheet. The other handouts that you've got is the budgets for the next 5 years. When we did the original growth plan back in the early 2000s, one of the mistakes I realized we made is that it had a separate format for the budget. So this year, we've literally put the budget into the QuickBooks organization. Our finances are done on QuickBooks, and it has account numbers and everything. So on the budgets, you'll actually see account numbers. So it's going to be easy to translate the budget that you see here to the annual budget, and we're actually going to put that into our documents, and we'll actually be able to produce monthly budget versus actuals. That's something that we wanted to do for the last year or so. So with that, let me get into it. The revised budget, we were forced. We adopted a budget back before COVID, essentially. By the time it was done, we didn't know what the impact would be. We thought COVID would be done by now. But that original budget had about a $170,000 deficit because enrollment was low. So we knew we had to change. And we couldn't. The other thing that was happening is that we couldn't meet the U.S. bank loan requirements. We did have the $213,000 in the PPP. That's the federal program for payroll protection program. We have that loan that's forgivable. That helped. And then we had the sale of properties that helped. But for that one-time revenue, we would not have met our loan covenants, and we would have been, in trouble. So that was a real concern. So the other thing is we needed to look long-term, and the result of the 5-year plan. Now I'll go through them quickly here. Okay, so I know this is hard to see, but I wanted to give you a sense of what it is. And maybe we could have the presentation focus on the screen itself. This actually shows the student growth over the course of 5 years. So our budget, basically the original budget for this year was the year 2 budget on this plan. So we are low this year, and then we go the construction year, the first year in the new preschool, the second year in the new preschool, and then stabilized. And the reason I wrote stabilized, it's not maximum, but it's at a point where essentially the school and preschool are flowing well and have enough enrollment. Now, we actually had, it goes all the way up to 224 students. Years ago, we had 220 students in that school before we had issues with staffing and principals and things like that. So we believe that we can get back to that. And we also, at this little campus here, we had upwards of 120, 30, 40 students, preschool students. So we think those numbers are definitely doable. And you see there's some pretty aggressive growth rates, 23% next year, at 35, then at 15 and 11% growth rate. So we are looking at that. We also had to look at our average tuition, and you'll see it there. 9,000 is rather high, but that is the extreme case where we have students that attend from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 12 hours a day, Monday through Friday. The truth is that our enrollment is a balance of 3 days a week or 2 days a week, AM and PM, the way that school is traditionally. But the majority of students in the preschool now are that full time. It's a reflection of our society today. And then you see the school enrollment. I mentioned that it's nearly 7,000. This year it'll go over 7,000. And when we built the school, it was 3. So that means the scale of the debt is, honestly, it's no longer daunting because our income is so high. Then we look at average full-time faculty. So the budget that we've given is basically Dr. Smith and pastor direction on what the average salary should be. Now, over the years, Bethany has developed a reputation for not paying enough. So when pastor came in and when the council talked this year, we said we need to increase salaries. So as you see there, they're low for the education level that our faculty and staff have. But we're making a consistent decision to have a 2.5% growth rate. Now, the 2.5% COLA, you may see if you look back in the last 5 years, it's been sometimes less than 1%, sometimes 2%. So at 2.5%, we're not achieving higher salaries in 1 year, but it will take a number of years to get that higher salary number up there. But that's our goal. And you'll see those salaries for the preschool and the school. And then you'll actually look at our income for the school and preschool per student. And what you're seeing there is about matching what the tuition is and fees. And then you have the total that's the C is the church, the S is school, and PS is preschool expenses per student. Where you see with lower enrollment, that's the issue that we have this year. You see cost of $10,000 per student with such low enrollment. But when you go higher, that drops all the way down to $7,800 with the higher enrollment. So there's a transition there. But that's why we have a problem this year, because our cost relative to the number of students in the school is way too high. And this is what we were worried about building the sanctuary now, that we would basically lock in those very high costs per student. And when you're at $10,000 per student and you're only charging $7,000, that's a big bust. You know, we need to get those numbers back into balance. Okay, the next sheet, I guess that's me. So this is the revenue over 5 years, and I know it's hard to see, but it's based on the number of classrooms in use, the number of students in the dark at the top in the gray. It's total students from 142, you know, goes all the way up to 380. And then you'll see how the tuition numbers are, and then you'll see the church income. And the church income is based on what we believe basically, though, is the numbers now. We believe we're going to hit this year's number, and with some fundraising, we can increase that. But then we sort of level off a little bit after the buildings are constructed for this phase. But you'll see, and this, when we talk about if we build the preschool first, we'll have revenue generated. So that revenue annually goes from 1.7 all the way up to 3.7 million. So there's a $2 million increase over this 5 years, which is a dramatic increase over a short period of time. Okay, the next sheet is the expense sheet. And there's something I want to point out in particular. On year 3, which is the first year in the new preschool, under church staff, the council feels strongly that we need to add additional church staff. And in the budget, you'll see dollars for a new associate pastor as well as a business manager. As this ministry grows, we really need to get back to the point where we have multiple pastors. Now, that decision at the time, it could be a DCE, which is a Director of Christian Education, or an associate pastor. That's really for decision at that point. But we felt strongly that we needed to budget and for that again. The other aspect is the business manager. Right now you've got volunteers like myself and Carol Wilson and other members have agreed to step up to the plate to fill in the gap. And we've spread that work out. But it is difficult, and as the organization gets larger, it's something that we need. But we're gonna make it work until then. But I wanted to point that out. The other thing that's happening with the preschool staff, right now with such low enrollment, there's only 2 full-time instructors. There's basically 2 classes of 12 as an example. As the school grows, though, that'll go up to 10 classes of 12 plus a toddler program. So that's why you see such tremendous growth in the preschool staff. The school staff is actually fairly stable. You don't see the growth there, and that's because they're basically filling up classes before they add new classes. And then I've got a graphic there from the number of staff from 24 all the way up to 45. And that's showing the growth in our ministry here at Bethany. And then the students, you see that there's a student and full-time equivalent teacher ratio. And you can see that the preschool almost has to stay consistent because the nature of that program. But the school goes from 12 up to 16, which means it's much more efficient. You're not increasing your cost, you're just increasing your revenue. And then the teacher cost per student, you see there, like on the school, $4,000 versus a $7,000 tuition, and the $3,000 is a combination of your other costs plus profit. And you see those numbers. While the preschool stays pretty consistent because your student-teacher ratio stays the same, the school gets much more efficient, and that number drops from 4,000 to less than 3,000. That's important. The other are the operating budget numbers and this is total school, preschool, and school. So salaries and benefits, administrative expenses, property management. So this is a summary of all of those sheets. And you see increase from total expenses of 1.4 to getting close to $3 million. And then the results over 5 years. And the annual net, basically net income off operations. This year, you see that number that in the low 200s. Understand that 213 of those dollars came from the PPP loan, the Payroll Protection Act loan. If not for that loan, our net operating income would be almost nothing, about $22,000 roughly a year. And that's way too low to actually pay our debt service even. So that's why we were in trouble this year. But then you see tremendous growth from $3 to $4 to $6 to $900,000. And those are real numbers. If we meet those projections, we will meet that number. And then we show our debt coverage ratio. That's very important for the bank. They want to know that you have 35% more, essentially, than what your payment actually is. So you see we're running very slim, 1.36, 1.5, 1.38. The minimum is 1.35. So the first 3 years we're really running very, very tight. And we can make adjustments as we go. But then the last 2 years, we start actually earning substantial money. Now, the reason it's so high in years 2 and 3, because we take a conservative approach of assuming it's going to take 3 years to fill the preschool. We're not going to make overly rosy projections where you fill the preschool, you build it, and they will come. We're assuming it's going to take 3 years. So each year, we're actually adding more students, more classes, more teachers to that preschool, and that's the result. And then you see the annual surplus from $191,000 this year. Again, $213 was PPP loan, up to over $700,000 a year in the future. Now, the bottom line is the cumulative cash. That's the cash, just like we've had since 2006 when the original school was built. We've accumulated cash over years, but with this preschool, as large as it is, over the time, we will accumulate in year 5 $1.9 million. And when we've said that we need to build the preschool to have the revenue to build the sanctuary, this is what I'm talking about. When we have $1.2 million, $1.9 million, we're going to be talking about building a sanctuary in that time frame, because at the same time our principal balance on our loan is going down. You see that loan balance at end of year. You see at year 5 the loan balance is 4.3 basically, and yet we have 1.9 in cash. We could, with the revenue at that point, refinance, and we're going to be like in year 5, just like we are now. We need a gap loan. So we may end up refinancing that debt in year 5, or we just may wait another year and pay for the sanctuary all in cash. So that's basically the results over the 5 years. We can't do this if we build the sanctuary first. I know we want the sanctuary first, and it was a really difficult decision, but I think the whole congregation has to come together, and hopefully we can get a decision that serves our mission and God's plan for Bethany as best we can. So Ron had an earlier slide of what the total recommendations are. With regard to this, it's to, at minimum, approve the current year budget, and then also ask for approval of the 5-year growth plan. So Ron, you want to close out? And thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Okay, well, thank you for your attention, and we ask that you prayerfully consider the documents that we send, and also to take it in light of the presentation. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Review the documents carefully and make an informed decision as to how you think Bethany should proceed. Please send your vote as you on the email that we send with the presentation, and from the email that you receive, just reply, or you can do it in the church office. So right now, I'll just offer a closing prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the time that people are spending to think about Bethany Ministry's future. And please guide everyone to the decision that you want Bethany to make. And guide us through the next year so that we can proceed with the plans. We know that you have a plan for us, and we ask that you guide us to that. In Jesus' name, amen.